So the Financial Services and Modernization Act of 1999, also known as LEACH BILEY, includes provision highlight V, so it's Title V, Privacy, that's how you remember it, to protect and regulate and disclose consumers' personal financial information. There are three principal parts to the title privacy requirement: safeguard rules, pretexting provisions, and financial privacy rule. So safeguard rule. The safeguard rule within the LEACH BILEY Act requires highlight all financial institutions and institutions that receive consumers' financial information to highlight design, implement, and maintain safeguards. And this is to protect consumers' information. So if you guys go to work in a mortgage company that doesn't have some type of design, implemented, and maintained safeguard to protect your consumers, ask them if they have that. I wouldn't work somewhere that's not protecting your consumers, because if they're not being protected and something goes wrong, then your license is there. It's your license, okay? While it is in custody and control of the institution and its agents, a highlight written safeguard policy must include provisions to ensure the security and highlight confidentiality of your consumers' records, protect against highlight anticipated threats or hazards to the security of such records, protect against the unauthorized access for the use of such records or information in ways that could result in substantial harm or inconvenience to your customers. Pretexting provisions. I must change the PowerPoint to pretexting provisions. Pretexting provisions highlight protect consumers, that's all you have to highlight, from individuals and companies who obtain their personal financial information under highlight and circle these words: false, fictitious, or fraudulent pretenses. So circle and highlight those words: false, fictitious, fraudulent. You need to make sure you know those, because they may ask you of the following which ones are, and then the one that isn't is a different F word that's not here. The Act sets forth that it is a violation of the Act for any person to obtain or attempt to obtain or cause to be disclosed or attempt to cause to be disclosed to any person customer information of a financial institution relating to any person by making a false, fictitious, or fraudulent statement or representation to an officer, employee, or agent of a financial institution, by making a false, fictitious, fraudulent statement or representation to a customer of a financial institution, or by providing any document to an officer, employee, agent of a financial institution, knowing that the document is forged, counterfeit, lost or stolen, was fraudulently obtained, or contains false, fictitious, or fraudulent statements or representation. Over on to financial privacy rule. The financial privacy rule is implemented by highlight Regulation P. How you're going to remember Regulation P, circle it, is its financial privacy rule. Circle the word privacy and then circle the P. So you're going to remember privacy rule, Regulation P, okay? Requires financial institutions to provide certain privacy notices, complies certain limitations on the disclosure of non-public personal information to non-affiliate third parties, and comply with certain limitations on disclosures and reuse. That's reuse. I kind of started that word. Non-public personal information is defined as any personal identifiable financial information not publicly available that a financial institution collects about an individual in connection with providing a financial product or service, such as information on an application. And those of you that were with me yesterday, information on an application could simply be, look, you go to Home Depot, you buy something for $200, and they say, you know what? If you apply for a credit card with us, we'll give you $50 off. And that's what Home Depot does. $50 off is pretty good. And then you go to that little thing that you run your credit card through, and you type in your social security number and how much money you make. That information is stored, and now they have information on you. Now, I don't want to be really crazy, but think about if you were going through a divorce and your spouse goes ahead and finds out you applied for an application somewhere and they ask for that information. They could probably subpoena it. And now they'll say, well, you said at Home Depot, you make $250,000 a year. It says on your tax return this. You know, are you paying me enough for my child support and alimony? I'm just saying, okay? And the other thing is, like when you ladies, sometimes men go to Ross and they do the same thing, get 10% off. So be careful with the information that you put out there. Just saying, okay? Going on. So it says information on an application, data from a credit reporting agency, Transactions between individuals and companies, such as account balances, payment history, debit card and credit card purchase information. So they know what you're buying. So if you ever wonder why, you buy kind of the same thing all the time, and then you get something in the mail on a postcard or on a solicitation that's the same thing that you always buy. And you're like, how did they know? Well, because you put it on your credit card. So anything you put on your credit card is pretty much almost public information. Going on. It says, in general, the financial privacy rule requires a financial institution to provide an initial consumer privacy policy notice to all consumers, which explains the lender's information collecting and information sharing practices. Additionally, the rule requires financial institutions to provide a revised privacy policy notice if there is any change to the information being disclosed, and highlight an annual privacy notice to all consumers. So all the stuff that you guys get in the mail, like sometimes people get stuff in the mail and they really don't pay that much attention to it. And you're like, this is just my credit card, or this is my bank account. And you really don't read it. If it has a return envelope, business envelope, that gives you a clue that you can opt out of them sharing your information. So you always want to look for that. Sometimes it doesn't have the envelope, but because I teach this class, I've learned that they're sharing my information and making money off me, and I really don't like that. I don't like to have people know what my business is. So whenever I get any kind of mail that looks like it's from one of the companies I work with, I always read it and look and see if there's a place to sign or call and opt out. So just something you guys might do, or even share with your clients so that they know that you're also concerned about their privacy.
What happens if, because I purchased a home last year.
Congratulations.
Oh, thank you.
Good job.
Not to sell my information.
And
then all of a sudden I was getting a bunch of junk information, and I know that probably
you're knowing that they sold your information. It depends on how they sold it and when they sold it. But I would actually call them and say, I got my privacy notice and I asked I opted out, and then I got a bunch of information. Who do I talk to make sure that you guys aren't selling my information? Because usually it's a phone call away. So she asked me, because she bought a house last year, why is she getting all this junk mail? And our information is all out there. Yeah. And unless you say you don't want them to share it, they have the right to share it. Because in your documentations, it always says, well, we have the right to share with our affiliate parties. So the only way that you can get out of it is when they send you your annual thing, look for it. And I remember one I got, it didn't have the envelope, but it was a bank that I worked with. So I'm like, it must be one of those notices. And so I looked everywhere, and it was like in this tiny box in a gray area that was not obvious. So watch your junk mail is what I would say. And if you want to call them and say, why is my stuff being shared? And maybe, request for it not to be shared. Because our stuff is out there. When we get into this, they actually share our account numbers, and they have our PIN numbers. Yeah. They have all that stuff, you guys. So they know how much money you have in your bank account too. So where was I? Initial privacy, I did that. So number 2 says, describes the condition under which the financial institution may disclose non-public personal information about consumers to non-affiliate third parties. Number 3 provides a method for consumers to prevent a financial institution from disclosing information to most non-affiliate third parties by opting out. So that's what we were talking about. Provides a model privacy form that may be used by creditors, prohibits financial institutions from disclosing, other than to consumer reporting agencies, check this out, access codes and other account numbers to any non-affiliate third party for the use of telemarketing, direct mail marketing, and other marketing through electronic mail. Kind of scary. The financial privacy policy sets forth the initial consumer privacy notice that must be provided to consumers, no later than when the customer relationship is established. So customers with a T, that's somebody who uses you more than twice, right? T, twice, customers. Right when the business relationship is established. However, for consumers, which is somebody who only uses somebody once and goes on to the next, before, circle that word before, because on your test it will say, when can they release information of consumers? And the answer starts with before non-public personal information about the consumer is disclosed. So right when you see that word before, it should stick out at you. So the initial consumer privacy notice does not need to be provided to the consumer if non-public personal information about the consumer is not disclosed to any non-affiliate third party. There is not a customer relationship with the consumer. Regulation P, remember for privacy, makes a clear distinction between a consumer and a customer. Remember that a consumer is any individual who obtains or has obtained a financial product or service to be used primarily for personal, family, and household purposes, or that individual's legal representative. A customer is a consumer who has a highlight continuing relationship with the creditor, okay? So continuing has a T in it, and so does customer. That's how you remember it. On page 52 at the top, it has examples of continuing relationships. You guys, those are something you can just read through on your own. You don't need me to walk you through the difference between a continuing relationship and somebody that's not continuing. So jump down to the U.S. Patriot Act. The U.S. Patriot Act is the uniting and strengthening of America by providing appropriate tools required to intercept and obstruct terrorists. More commonly known as the USA Patriot Act rule, was enacted in October of 2001 in response to September 11, 2001 terrorist attack. The act increases the ability of law enforcement agencies to highlight search, telephone, email, medical, and financial records, highlight eases restrictions on foreign intelligence gathering within the U.S., highlight expands the Secretary of Treasury's highlight authority to regulate, highlight financial transactions, particularly those involving highlight foreign individuals and entities. Highlight enhances the discretion of law enforcement and highlight immigration authorities to deporting immigrants suspected of terrorist-related acts. Highlight Title III of the Patriot Act, designated the International Money Laundering Abatement and Financial Anti-Terrorist Act of 2001. Requires lenders and banks, highlight requires banks to create and maintain, highlight customer identification program to prevent financing of terrorist operations and money laundering. The CIP requires covered institutions to highlight, verify identity of customers, that's customers with a T, who are entering into highlight a formal relationship, such as taking out a loan or a credit account. So that you can remember this, pretty much the customer identification program, it's really not that bad because it's stuff that they would collect from you on any kind of account. Like when you walk in the bank and open a bank account, they're gonna ask for the same basic stuff. So here goes. Your name, of course they need your name, and your birthday, and your resident or work address. So at least some address they can locate you at. Those are the easy things. And then the U.S. citizens or legal entities organized under state law, highlight tax identification number. So that could be a social security number or a TIN number. So a TIN number is usually used for businesses. For lawful permanent residents or non-immigrants, a TIN number, passport number, and country of issuance, alien identification card number, or number and country of issuance of any other government-issued document evidencing nationality or residence and bearing a photo ID. So it's a photo. The last one is a non-U.S. legal entity with no TIN number, a government-issued certificate of existence in good standing. And the last one, it's not the last one in this chapter, is it? It is. Do you believe that? The last one in this chapter is the electronic signature in global and national commerce. Now, a lot of the stuff that I just went over is also going to be in one of the later chapters because I remember going over it twice. But the reason that they have a lot of stuff that we go over 2 or 3 times is so that you guys remember it. I'm going to check your chats as soon as I do the electronic signature, global and national commerce. Now, this one is also, it's like they cut and pasted it in the book. But the electronic signature, what's important about it, you guys, the main thing about the electronic signatures, number one, when you're going to have somebody use electronic signatures, you need to give them an authorization to use that electronic signature. You don't just start sending them stuff on electronic signature and expect them to go ahead and do it, okay? The next thing, don't do something stupid, okay? Because I just met a loan officer that he wanted to come work at our company, and the guy that screens everybody that comes to work for us, he's like, he's under investigation. I'm like, for what? And he goes, he would make up fake email addresses so that he wouldn't have to actually send it to the customer. He would send it to his fake email address and do the signing for his consumer or customer. And I'm just like, okay, we don't want that. And then the next thing we knew, he's like, well, that was my processor who was doing it. So he made a big deal that it was his processor who was doing it, and he had no idea. Okay, well, according to the law, and according to us being licensed loan officers, we're supposed to be supervising our processors. So if your processor is doing that, then you might have known that your processor was doing that. In addition, later on, we found out his processor was like his stepdaughter. And we're like, okay, so I value my license. I don't know about you guys, but it takes a long time to get your license and study for it. There's no need to do anything sneaky and tricky because guess what? We can make money doing everything legally and honestly. Isn't that great? So don't make up fake emails. Anyway, so the other thing about the electronic signatures is your client has to know how to get them and how to save them. And they have to know that if they started with an electronic signature and all of a sudden they're feeling kind of uncomfortable about it, they can cancel out of the electronic signature anytime they want. All they have to do is call you and say, you know what, I'm not comfortable with this. I want to sign a wet signature instead of electronic signature. Now, if maybe the husband's okay with it and the wife's not, the husband can sign electronically and the wife can sign wet signatures. So it's up to the person, okay? So you can't just group them together. The other thing is you have to make sure that they know that if there's any special software or hardware that they need for the electronic signature, that you're going to show them how to do that and make sure they understand it. The good news is there's usually not any special hardware or software because electronic signatures, like we real estate agents use zip forms. We use zip forms and we use DocuSign. Those are the two most popular ones. And for the most part, once the contract is executed by everybody gets a copy of the executed contract for them to download and keep. So you want to make sure they know that they can do that. Okay, so that's all the important stuff. We're going to highlight what's in the book. So let's look at the book on page 53. It says, to ensure the validity and legality of the contracts and documents entered into electronic signature, a party to a contract cannot be forced to use electronic signatures and may sign in ink if that's called the wet signature. One party can use the electronic signature while another party goes ahead and does the wet signature. Anything that they signed while it was electronic and then they changed their mind is still valid and it's still a binding contract. The consumer must receive disclosure information regarding the right to have a legible copy of the documents provided that discloses when consent applies, describes procedures and implements and withdraw permission of electronic signatures. If a statute, rule, or regulation requires retention period of a contract or other record that contains or allows for electronic signatures, that condition is met by the retention of the electronic record by the information in the contract, which must remain accessible to all parties who are entitled by law to access it. A person can withdraw their consent from electronic signature highlight any time during the process. So that's what you need to know in chapter 1, and we're going to do the questions and answers.